Welcome back to Ed Resonance Talks, where we peel back the layers on complex issues. Today we're diving into something incredibly important and frankly quite disturbing: the neurobiology of passion exploitation, specifically within the teaching profession. We're talking about how dedication, that deep love for teaching, is being weaponized against educators.
It's a topic that hits really close to home for so many people, myself included. You hear stories all the time about teachers working late, spending their own money on supplies, and everyone just shrugs and says, "Oh, that's just what teachers do." But what we're going to explore today isn't just about financial strain or feeling tired. It's about actual, measurable biological degradation. It's an occupational phenomenon that's literally changing teachers' brains and bodies.
Exactly, Alice. We're moving beyond the anecdotal to the empirical. The expectation for uncompensated labor, for teachers to dig into their own pockets, isn't some noble tradition. It's culturally justified by this idea that teaching is a calling, not just a job. And while it sounds virtuous, research in organizational psychology and neuroscience reveals it's a systemic trap, fundamentally altering brain architecture and accelerating cellular aging.
A calling that demands endless personal sacrifice, right? I mean, who benefits from that narrative? It feels like it's set up to make educators feel guilty if they don't work 60 hours a week or buy notebooks out of their grocery budget. It's like their passion is being used as leverage.
That's precisely where the concept of vocational awe comes in. It describes a set of ideas that frame certain service professions, like teaching, as inherently good, sacred, and therefore almost beyond critique. The term vocation itself, comes from the Latin vocatio, meaning a call or summons, historically tied to monastic traditions of poverty and absolute obedience.
Monastic traditions. Wow. So when that framework is secularized and applied to teaching, it creates this toxic environment where advocating for basic labor rights like strict adherence to hours, fair compensation, or even taking a full lunch break is suddenly seen as petty or selfish. Like you don't love the kids enough if you want a living wage.
Precisely. It functions as a potent mechanism of institutional control. The efficacy and moral worth of an educator become directly tied to their willingness to suffer for the role. Martyrdom becomes the standard metric of professional commitment. The more you sacrifice, the holier the work is perceived to be. This rhetoric effectively neutralizes any advocacy for healthier, equitable workspaces.
It's infuriating, honestly. It makes you feel like you're betraying your students if you don't pour every last drop of yourself into the job, even when the system itself is clearly failing. And then, when you're completely drained, they blame you for not being passionate enough, right?
Absolutely. And vocational awe creates fertile ground for what organizational psychologists define as the legitimization of passion exploitation. Multiple studies show that society, management, and even colleagues systematically deem poor worker treatment as significantly more legitimate when the worker is presumed to be passionate about their job.
So, because I love teaching, it's okay if I'm underpaid or have to buy my own whiteboard markers? That's the passion tax we hear about, isn't it?
That's exactly it. The passion tax. This legitimization operates in two ways. First, there's a false assumption that passionate workers voluntarily opt into extra work, erasing any coercive nature. Second, there's a pervasive belief that for passionate workers, the work itself is its own reward, justifying substandard compensation and offloading systemic costs onto the individual.
I've seen it firsthand. Teachers accepting salaries that don't cover the cost of living while also buying snacks for hungry kids or paying for printing costs. It's not just a few dollars here and there, it adds up to hundreds, sometimes thousands, a year. And it's expected.
It's a huge issue, and national surveys often underestimate the true amount. This dynamic is rooted in what's called gift economy misrecognition. Educators often misinterpret their employer employee relationship as having elements of a gift economy, feeling an initial sense of gratitude upon entering the profession.
Ah, so they feel like they've been given this amazing opportunity, this calling, and they need to reciprocate with unpaid labor and personal spending.
Precisely. But as the structural deficiencies become glaringly apparent, this gift turns into a poisoned gift. The realization that their passion is being used to offset chronic institutional underfunding leads to profound disillusionment, burnout, and massive attrition rates, especially among early career educators.
It's no wonder so many new teachers leave the profession within their first 5 years. They come in with so much idealism, so much energy, and then they're just completely used up and spat out. It's a tragedy, not just for the individuals, but for our education system as a whole.
And the impact isn't just psychological or emotional. This overwork, financial stress, and lack of restorative recovery culminate in burnout, which the World Health Organization classifies not as a psychiatric disorder or personal failing, but as an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic, unmanaged workplace stress. But even that framing, Alice, severely obscures its profound biological reality.
Right, because it's not just feeling burned out, it's a cellular and neurological emergency. It's your body literally breaking down under the pressure of a system designed to extract rather than restore.
Exactly. The Atlas model, the psychobiological model of teacher stress and classroom interactions, gives us an integrated understanding. It shows how occupational demands translate into biological wear and tear. A teacher's brain is constantly in threat detection mode, scanning for stressors from student behavior to unfunded mandates and unpaid labor.
So, your amygdala, that ancient part of your brain that screams danger at you, is constantly on high alert, like a smoke detector that never turns off?
Precisely. When the amygdala detects a threat, it triggers an acute stress response. Your sympathetic nervous system and HPA axis activate, releasing cortisol and adrenaline. In a healthy cycle, you deal with the threat, and then your system would return to baseline. But for teachers, the constant demands and uncompensated labor deny them the time to complete that biological stress cycle.
It's like running a marathon, but you're never allowed to cross the finish line or even stop for water. You just keep going, day after day, year after year.
And that continuous, relentless activation of the HPA axis leads to chronic dysregulation. This fundamentally alters the structure and function of the educator's brain. We're talking about structural neuroplasticity, but in a really negative way.
So, literally, their brain is physically remodeling itself under stress.
Yes, absolutely. For example, the hippocampus, vital for memory, learning, and emotional regulation, is highly sensitive to cortisol. Chronic exposure to high cortisol levels actually shrinks the hippocampus. Neuroimaging studies show volume reductions of up to 20% in individuals with severe, unmitigated chronic stress.
20%, that's huge. So, a teacher with a shrunken hippocampus isn't just forgetful, they're literally losing the neural capacity for the creative, adaptive, empathetic thinking that good teaching requires. They're impaired.
They are. And simultaneously, that same chronic stress causes hypertrophy, an increase in size, and hyperreactivity in the amygdala, that threat detection center we just talked about. So, a burned out teacher's amygdala is constantly overactive, locking their brain into perpetual fight or flight mode.
That explains so much. The extreme irritability, the emotional outbursts, interpreting minor things as huge threats. A student's eye roll or a new email suddenly feels like a personal attack because your brain is biologically primed for it.
Exactly. And then there's the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, which handles all our higher order executive functions: complex decision making, planning, emotional control, perspective taking. Under chronic stress, the PFC is effectively taken offline or structurally suppressed. It shrinks, diminishing the neural networks needed for reasoning and judgment.
So, when a teacher is struggling to make simple decisions, feeling constant cognitive fatigue, or can't adapt to new curriculums, it's not a lack of effort. It's executive rigidity, a literal breakdown in their brain's ability to be flexible and think clearly.
That's exactly it. And the biological cost goes even deeper, down to the cellular level. Telomeres, the protective caps on our chromosomes, shorten with each cell division, but chronic psychological stress drastically accelerates this shortening, leading to premature cellular aging.
So, a teacher burning out isn't just feeling old. They are, biologically speaking, aging faster than they should be because of their job.
That's what the research indicates. Teacher burnout is a measurable marker of accelerated biological aging. Plus, chronic stress suppresses brain derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. That's your brain's primary growth hormone, responsible for neuroplasticity and neuron survival. Low BDNF locks educators into a depressive, exhausted state, making recovery incredibly difficult without targeted intervention.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? And it's compounded by the cultural mandate that teachers must always demonstrate unwavering passion and a perpetual love for their students. That forces them into what's called emotional labor.
Oh, emotional labor is a huge component of this. It's the mental effort and energy expended to manage, suppress, or manufacture emotional displays to fulfill the role's expectations. In a vocational awe environment, any expression of frustration, exhaustion, or resentment about unpaid labor is seen as a moral failure.
So teachers are constantly manipulating their emotional output, putting on a faithful face even when they're crumbling inside. That sounds exhausting.
It is. There are two main strategies: deep acting, where you genuinely try to change your internal emotional state, and surface acting, which is faking or masking emotions. Because passion exploitation drains cognitive resources, teachers often lack the bandwidth for deep acting and default to surface acting.
And I'm guessing surface acting isn't good for you.
It's highly neurotoxic. Extensive research links surface acting to elevated cortisol, accelerated telomere attrition, and rapid onset of severe emotional exhaustion. Think about it: when you suppress negative emotions, your brain has to recruit extensive top down inhibitory control networks, heavily relying on your prefrontal cortex.
So you're literally using up your brain power just to pretend to be happy or patient, even when you're seething inside.
Exactly. Maintaining that outward display of passion requires strenuous, sustained neurocognitive effort. Over time, this overuse erodes executive flexibility. Your neural circuits get fatigued, leading to weakened connectivity between brain regions, and even measurable cortical thinning in parts of the prefrontal cortex.
So the very brain areas needed to teach effectively are being degraded by the effort to appear dedicated. It's mind-bogglingly counterproductive.
And the impact doesn't stop with the teacher. The biological consequences of emotional exhaustion affect the entire classroom ecosystem. Our nervous systems communicate through mirror neurons and microexpressions. So, when an educator is in a state of sympathetic hyperarousal, that fight or flight mode, or heavily surface acting, their students' mirror neuron systems unconsciously detect and mimic this physiological dysregulation.
So, a stressed teacher literally creates a stressed classroom. Their cortisol levels can induce measurable, concurrent increases in their students' cortisol levels. That's direct neurobiological contagion.
That's what the research shows. A burned out, dysregulated teacher creates a dysregulated classroom, not just through poor management, but through inescapable biological contagion. Conversely, a teacher who feels safe, regulated, and authentically connected helps students' nervous systems entrain to that rhythm, keeping their prefrontal cortices online for learning.
This means protecting educators from passion exploitation isn't just a labor issue, it's a fundamental biological prerequisite for student learning. It impacts everything.
It truly does. And all of this systemic wear and tear manifests as what's called allostatic load. This is the cumulative, multisystemic biological wear and tear that occurs when the body is forced to continually adapt to adverse situations without adequate recovery. It's precisely quantified using a multi biomarker index.
So, we're talking about measurable impacts on neuroendocrine, cardiovascular, metabolic, and immune systems, not just feeling run down, but actual damage?
Absolutely. Neuroendocrine markers show HPA axis dysregulation, altered cortisol rhythms that destroy sleep. Cardiovascular markers include elevated resting heart rate, decreased heart rate variability, and increased blood pressure, significantly raising the risk of cardiovascular disease. Metabolically, we see prolonged hyperglycemia, insulin resistance, and accumulation of visceral fat.
So, literally, the job is making them sick, physically sick. And I know you mentioned chronic inflammation too. That's a huge one, right?
Yes, chronic systemic inflammation is one of the most insidious consequences. While acute stress initially suppresses the immune system, prolonged high cortisol leads to glucocorticoid receptor resistance. The immune system becomes insensitive to cortisol's anti inflammatory signals, resulting in non resolving, low grade systemic inflammation. We see elevated levels of pro inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 6 and C reactive protein.
And these inflammatory markers, IL-6 and CRP, they don't just affect physical health, do they? They have direct psychiatric consequences.
Exactly. Longitudinal neurobiological research shows that elevated systemic inflammation directly predicts and correlates with the onset of depersonalization and derealization, which are core components of burnout syndrome. Depersonalization in educators manifests as a cynical, callous, and emotionally detached attitude towards students, parents, and colleagues.
So, that loss of passion or cynicism that administrators often complain about in burned out teachers, it's not a moral failing, it's a biologically mediated symptom of neuroinflammation. Their brain is literally changing how they perceive reality and social connection because of constant stress and inflammation.
Precisely. The system is designed to extract, leading to a breakdown that's then blamed on the individual teacher. But there are ways to escape this trap, to restore neurobiological homeostasis. The first step is aggressively dismantling those internalized narratives of vocational awe.
Recognizing that teaching is a contractual occupation with limits, not a monastic vow demanding endless sacrifice. That's powerful. So, what specific strategies can educators use to protect themselves, biologically speaking?
First and foremost, they need to complete the stress cycle. The myth is that you just need to manage stress, but when your body enters fight or flight, stress hormones prepare you for physical action. Since teaching stressors are psychological, those neurochemicals stay in your bloodstream. You need to physically discharge them.
So, going for a brisk walk, stretching, deep breathing, connecting with friends outside of work, those aren't just nice to haves, they're biological requirements to clear cortisol and allow your nervous system to return to a calm state.
Absolutely critical. And then there's psychological detachment. This means completely disengaging from work related thoughts and tasks during non work time. When teachers grade at home, buy supplies on weekends, or answer emails at night, they're violently violating their work home boundaries. This fuels work related rumination, continuously activating the HPA axis.
So, basically, stop bringing work home? Remove work email from your personal phone? That's tough, but it sounds necessary for actual recovery.
It's vital. Biological recovery requires active engagement in the drama model's components: detachment, relaxation, autonomy, mastery in non work hobbies, meaning outside of teaching, and affiliation. By establishing rigid boundaries, you allow your default mode network to activate. That's a brain network critical for self reflection and neurocognitive restoration, which is suppressed during burnout.
And mindfulness plays a role here too, right? Like mindfulness based stress reduction.
Yes, MBSR and MBCT induce targeted structural neuroplasticity. Functional imaging shows they decrease the volume and reactivity of the amygdala while increasing the density and functional connectivity of the prefrontal cortex. This strengthens the brain's top down regulatory networks, allowing educators to move from toxic surface acting to more adaptive cognitive reappraisal.
So, through mindfulness, you can actually rewire your brain to better regulate emotions and step back before you get totally overwhelmed. That sounds like true empowerment.
It is, at an individual level. However, individual boundary setting and mindfulness are necessary for neurobiological recovery, but entirely insufficient to correct systemic exploitation. Relying solely on individual resilience often leads to institutional victim blaming. To truly dismantle the trap of passion exploitation, educators must shift from individual martyrdom to systemic collective resistance.
You can't just meditate your way out of a broken system, you need to change the system itself. So, how does collective action fit into this neurobiological picture?
The safest and most effective method is strict, unapologetic contractual compliance, often called work to rule. This is where employees perform exactly the duties outlined in their contract, working precisely the required hours and absolutely nothing more. No personal money spent, no emails answered outside hours, no uncompensated tutoring.
Okay, so you just do what you're paid to do and nothing beyond that. No more going above and beyond if it's outside the contract. How does that help the brain?
Neurobiologically, work to rule is a powerful protective shield. By deciding in advance that no labor will occur outside contracted hours, the educator eliminates chronic decision fatigue and the heavy cognitive load of constantly negotiating boundaries. This rigid structure guarantees periods of psychological detachment, halting that continuous drip of cortisol and allowing the nervous system to reliably enter parasympathetic recovery.
That makes so much sense. It removes the guesswork and the guilt, and I imagine that if a whole group of teachers does this together, it feels much safer than just one person standing up alone.
Absolutely. Administrators often weaponize passion to isolate educators. Individually, refusing unpaid labor can trigger social anxiety and increase amygdala activation. But when educators organize collectively, especially through unions, to implement work to rule campaigns, they establish deep psychological safety.
Psychological safety fundamentally alters the brain's threat appraisal mechanisms. So, supported by peers, the amygdala activity is downregulated. The brain isn't screaming danger when you defy institutional authority.
Exactly. Plus, collective action under a union provides legal safeguards. organized work to rule campaigns are often protected concerted activities, shielding educators from retaliation. By standing together, they force institutions to confront the true, unvarnished cost of operating the educational system without the massive subsidy of unpaid passion.
It exposes the dysfunction. If an educational organization can't function without relying on systemic overwork and the financial subsidization of its own employees, then the organization is fundamentally broken and needs structural reform. It's not the teachers who are failing, it's the system.
In conclusion, Alice, the expectation for educators to sacrifice their well being out of love is a direct manifestation of vocational awe. It's an ideological construct designed to legitimize passion exploitation, obscuring systemic underfunding and shifting burdens onto the individual.
And the biological reality is devastating. Uncompensated labor, emotional suppression, surface acting, it all inflicts profound neurological and physiological damage. It drives allostatic load, neuroinflammation, physically shrinks the hippocampus, overactivates the amygdala, and exhausts the prefrontal cortex.
Burnout, then, isn't a sign of individual weakness or lack of dedication. It's the predictable, systemic failure of a human nervous system pushed entirely beyond its biological limits. To survive, educators must actively deconstruct this mythology.
Biological protection requires strict psychological detachment, completing the stress cycle, and using cognitive reappraisal. But ultimately, the most effective defense is collective contractual compliance. By organizing to strictly work to rule, educators protect their neurobiology, preserve their cognitive capacity to teach, and force systemic accountability.
Ensuring that the future of education is sustained by equitable resources, not the biological depletion of its teachers. It's time we truly value those who educate our children, and not just in words. Thank you for joining us on Ed Resonance Talk.
Hard. It's a conversation that needs to happen. Thank you, Robert, and thank you all for listening. Please join the conversation and don't forget to like and follow so you don't miss all of our upcoming discussion. Check out edresonance.com to explore all of what we do. Remember to stay healthily and take care of your brains. We appreciate you for taking the time to tune into learning.